Then he, Jesus, told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And join me in a word of prayer. Holy God, as we gather around your holy word once again, we ask that you free us from the stories of scarcity we tell ourselves. Expand our imagination, deepen our trust, and teach us what it truly means to be rich toward you. We love you so much, Lord. All God's people say, Amen. So let me just go ahead and name it. I'm going to clear the air. I've never liked this parable. I just haven't. I've never liked it, okay? Now, some of you might be feeling the same way, and that's okay if you are. You're allowed to not like a parable. You're allowed to feel your own feelings, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. Some of you might not like it, and that's fine. Some of you might also be shocked at the fact that I just said I don't like a parable. And so if that's the case, let me explain a little bit more. Some of you might know this about me. This might be new news to some of you, but I read a lot of personal finance books, like a lot. I read a lot of personal finance books. It was a hobby of mine that turned into kind of an obsession, and now it kind of serves as this like literary comfort food, if you know what I mean. So I just kind of put it on if I'm in a bad mood, and by a lot, I mean a lot. So let me clarify. Like I bought multiple copies of the same book so I could see the new expanded edition a lot. That's a lot, right? I've done a lot of that. A lot like I buy them before they come out so they're delivered to me on the actual release date a lot. I do a lot. A lot like when people see my listen history on the Libby library, they say, oh, that's a lot of personal finance books, Brian. I said, yeah, I listen to a lot. Back to the parable. I've never really liked it. It does not compute. It challenges a lot of the other things that I read. It conflicts my mind and my heart just a little bit too much for my comfort level, and I don't like that. So let's talk about it a little bit more, okay? Surface level in our parable, we've got a farmer, a backbone of America, right? Working man doing his thing, he's out there. And it's a good crop year, hooray, right? Yeah, it's a bountiful harvest. Good job, hardworking man, well done. And it was so good, in fact, that this man decides to do some long-term planning. Let's store, let's build, let's expand, right? Well, think about what I listen to all the time. Think about the things you've heard before, okay? Dave Ramsey, one of the personal finance OGs, Dave Ramsey would say, live like no one else today so you can live like no one else tomorrow, right? Save up. You go for it, farmer. Well done. Exactly. Build those bigger barns today so you can relax later. He'd give him a high five right there, right? Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett might read this parable and say, yeah, we sit in the shade today because we planted a tree a long time ago. Way to plan ahead, buddy. Way to be forward thinking. Good job. Ramit Sethi from I Will Teach You to Be Rich always says, the rich life is your life when you set up your system to make it be that way. I think Ramit would agree that this guy is setting up his system for long-term thinking here. Build that barn, move that bus, right? Erin Lowry from the Broke Millennial, she says this. She says, you get your financial life together by thinking about your future you. And this guy is doing just that. Thinking about his future self, planning for it, going for it. I said I read a lot, right? You want some more? Let's keep going. Rapid fire, okay? Anyone in the FIRE movement would high five this guy because they say, create financial independence so you can retire early. Good job. Haley Sachs from AKA Mrs. Dow Jones puts it like this: you make finance cool when you make your finances work for you. J.L. Collins from The Simple Path to Wealth writes, the more money you have, the more freedom you have. And isn't that really the goal? Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money is the one who puts it like this: the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want to do today. Vivian Tu, who wants to be your rich BFF, implores you in this way. She says, make what you have last as long as you can. And Nicole Lappin, who's written 5 books in the last 10 years that essentially all say the same thing, says, let your investments work harder than you do. And that's exactly what this guy is doing, isn't it? Essentially what I'm saying is this: every financial influencer, every money guru, every wealth wizard preaches some version of this: save, invest, compound, build wealth, think long term. And then Jesus tells a story about a guy who's doing exactly that, but then says, you fool. So yeah, I've never really liked this parable. You kind of understand a little bit more why now? I try really hard to be a responsible planner, to be a good steward, a faithful financier, if you will. I try really, really hard at this stuff. And then I hear Jesus say at the end of the parable, he says, you fool. And frankly, it kind of cuts me like a knife. Have you ever been riding high and feeling good and feeling like the world is at your feet, and then out of nowhere, suddenly you start to question everything you've been doing, everything you've been building, everything you are. Start to question if you've been wrong the whole time. You start to question, maybe I am a fool. Life can be cruel. Adulting can be so hard. The twists and the turns and the yuck and the suck, they just keep coming sometimes. And just like when you feel like you can't breathe, just when you feel like you're not making any headway, you hear those words that you're trying so hard to do, but then you hear, you fool. You fool. Walter Brueggemann, a former professor of mine at Columbia who sadly passed away last summer, this is one of the most influential biblical interpreters of our generation. This is the one who wrote just about in every academic periodical that exists out there. He's written over 100 books. I kid you not, over 100 books. That's more than all the financial people I just quoted together. Yeah, he's written that many books. Walter Brueggemann has a slightly different way of looking at this parable, a slightly more helpful way of looking at this parable than was my first take, perhaps. And that doesn't really surprise me. He's a little bit different. He always had a different approach to everything he kind of did there. So a different way of looking, a more optimistic, we could say, way of looking at this parable. So let's talk about it. Let's dive in. First of all, Brueggemann is big on saying the Bible begins with abundance. It's us who begin with scarcity. And think about it. Now, the Bible begins with abundance. We begin with scarcity. We're not supposed to, but we do, right? Think back to Genesis 1, all the way back there. Remember how God literally made everything. Trees, plants, fruit, sun, shade, water, animals, crops, blessings. God made it all. All, everything, abundance, everywhere. And God called it good, great, grand, grandiose, right? And the Bible begins with this good, great abundance everywhere. Yet for some reason, we feel like we have to start with scarcity. Why is that? He says, for some reason, modern society has sold us all on this idea that there is not enough, that there will never be enough. And when we start to let that be the voice inside of our heads, when we let that seep into our hearts, when we let this scarcity script start to dictate our lives and our actions, it starts to produce things in us. And no, it's not the fruit of the Spirit. It's kind of the opposite of that, right? It starts to produce things like anxiety and unchecked competition and hoarding and endless accumulation. Why do we do this? Why are we wired this way? Brueggemann also likes to point out that notice the man is already rich in this parable before it begins. Look at it again. It says, the land of a rich man produced abundantly. Before this round of abundance came, he was already rich, the land of a rich man. So Brueggemann writes, the problem is that we think if we can just get a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, then we won't have to go to that scarcity script anymore. Then we won't be anxious. Then we won't try to hoard all the things. Then we can be generous, right? If we just get a little bit more, but it's a trap. He says more abundance will never cure scarcity thinking. Scarcity is a trap, and it becomes your way of imagining the world around you. All right, second point. Brueggemann likes to compare and contrast a lot. He says this thing and then that thing, and you kind of hold them up together. And one thing he likes to point to a lot is God's economy and Pharaoh's economy. He's big into the Old Testament, right? So God's economy and Pharaoh's economy. Go back to our first lesson for the day here. The people of God are wandering in the wilderness and they're hungry, and so God sends man and says, I will always provide for you, and God does. Time and time again, God continues to provide for them. But what do? Rather than trust this, rather than trusting God's abundance and God's promise here, they begin to gather and hoard the manna, the blessing that they've been given, right? And the manna rots physically on the outside, while the fear begins to rot them spiritually on the inside. And it's eating away at them. Brueggemann says this is Pharaoh's economy at its finest right here. They're living within Pharaoh's economy right there. Pharaoh's economy is the economy that they learned in Egypt as slaves. And he's quick to say that we still are slaves to it today. A lot of times we are. Produce more, it says. Accumulate more, it says. Store more, it says. We fear that there will never be enough. We seek security in what we can control, and so we try to control the things that we have, and we try to protect them and hide them away. But God teaches a very different economy. God invites us into a very different way of being. God teaches enough instead of excess. God teaches trust instead of anxiety. Daily dependence instead of long-term hoarding. Generosity instead of accumulation. Brueggemann argues that to be rich toward God, which is what's at the very end of our parable, verse 21 there, to be rich toward God is to live in God's economy rather than Pharaoh's. Notice at the very end it also says it's not necessarily bad what he's doing, but he's doing it not for the right reasons. We can do things, but if you're not rich toward God, then what's the point? A couple more, rapid fire. Let's keep going. Some things Brueggemann pointed out that I hadn't really picked up on before. Notice all the first-person pronouns in this parable. I, my, mine, right? Over and over and over again in this passage says, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. There I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, over and over and over again in this passage, it's all about him. His world has shrunk down to a single character, hasn't it? Everything is all about him. And in his thoughts and what he's saying, there's no God. There's no thankfulness. There are no neighbors. There's no community. There's no workers. There's no poor. There's no family. It's only himself. His world revolves exclusively around himself. Brueggemann often defines sin in different ways because he said it isn't just merely about breaking the rules. Sometimes he says it's living inside a distorted, isolated, selfish narrative. And if you begin to think that the world is revolving just around you, I would call that a distorted, isolated, selfish narrative that you're living in, right? Yeah. That's a sin. That's missing the mark. That's living off, right? One more. Brueggemann also makes the point that he doesn't think this parable is even about money at all. As he said, it's not about money, it's not about wealth, it's not about personal finance, it's not about any of that. It's about this guy's need for autonomy. He says the Bible repeatedly opposes the illusion of self-sufficiency. Over and over again we see it. Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own insight. Proverbs 27:1, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Psalm 27, some take pride in chariots and some in horses, but our pride is in the name of the Lord. The rich fool imagines within this parable, I have secured my own future. And God has to interrupt and say, no, you haven't. Death in this parable plays an interesting role. Death here exposes the false narrative. Death disrupts, we could say, back to our theme. Death disrupts the false narrative here. When God says this very night your life is being demanded of you, it's not a threat, it's not punishment, it's revelation. It's providing clarity. Death reveals that all the stories this man was telling himself about security and self-sufficiency and autonomy, all those stories were never actually true. That's what death plays in this parable. It reveals and it disrupts. And so, like I said, I've never really liked this parable, and I'm still not sure if I do. Because of my proclivity and preference for all those podcasts and personal finance personalities, and remember it's a lot, because of my preference for all those things, often I'd rather listen to them, right? I'd rather listen to my literary comfort food. I'd rather hear the prophets of passive investing because they put things back in my hands and in my control, right? I'd rather enjoy the apostles of asset allocation because they allow me to feel like I can take charge. Or maybe listen to the high priest of compound interest because that gives me hope. Maybe the bishop of budgeting gives me boundaries. The patron saint of Roth IRAs give me shelter. The evangelist of ETFs, well, they give me choice. But then you hear Jesus' words, you fool. Now hear me out. I think in the same way that we've been conditioned to live in Pharaoh's economy, I think we've been conditioned to hear this as if Pharaoh is saying it to us, not Jesus. All right? The Greek word used for fool here is aphron, which literally means without sense or unwise. It does carry a certain moral and spiritual weight to it in the original language, yes, but it doesn't carry anger or judgment that we often associate with it. It's just not embedded in that word. It's not attached to it at all. But still, I think we hear it as if Pharaoh is saying it to us. And if Pharaoh is saying it to us, those things are included in it, right? Pharaoh is saying this as condemnation. He's saying, you fool, you moron, you ignorant ignoramus. You screwed up again. You are such a mess. When are you going to get this right? Probably never, because you are a fool. Take out the anger. Take out the judgment. They're not in the original Greek. And I don't think they're in what Jesus is saying to us. What if it was more like, you fool, my beloved foolish fool? You have completely missed the point again. The problem is not that he has too much. That's not the problem. The problem is that he thinks it all belongs to him. Scarcity is not an economic condition. It's a theological conviction. The barns get larger because his imagination has become smaller. Consumerism is not about possessions. It's about identity. The rich fool mistakes accumulation for security. He confuses God's gift with his achievement. The opposite of greed is not poverty, it's trust. The opposite of anxiety is not wealth, it's faith. Imagine if you were in the group of people who heard this parable for the very first time when Jesus was saying it. Think of the context back then. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. It's a long trip. He stopped a lot. He's stopping to rest and to eat and to teach. And he stopped because people just kind of interrupt him and want to have time with Jesus. And so Jesus is walking along the road again, and someone in the crowd that had gathered that day shouted out at Jesus, said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." And that's chapter 12, verse 13. And then verse 14, Jesus responds with a, "You want me to be your judge, your arbitrator, your family lawyer? Really? That's what you're stopping me for?" And the next verse, verse 15, it says, "Be careful, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." And then verse 16, our passage begins. He says, "Let me tell you a parable. The brother was looking for a payday." Now, maybe he was out of money. Maybe he needed some help. Maybe he was thinking that that was going to give him the security that he was craving. Maybe he thought that that would give him control over something that he didn't have control over. I don't know. But the brother was looking for a payday, and the parable is Jesus' answer to a deeper question. One about abundance, not scarcity. One about what it means to live in God's economy, not Pharaoh's. What happens when we begin to believe that life is more than simply what we possess? To close today, I just want you to hear the words of Jesus. I want you to hear the parable one more time. Listen to Jesus' response. "The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, 'Well, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops.' And then he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And then I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, all God's children say, Amen.